And we'll bring Rob Pincus on. We've got him on camera for everybody, and he's on the phones with us. And we'll get cracking some more New Jersey updates from a New Jersey native.
Yeah, sure. Places to watch the show are going to be YouTube, Rumble, and Facebook. Just do a search for Armed American Radio with Mark Walters. If you're on X, you can search for @AARMark and find us there. You can always head on over to armedamericanradio.org or .com, hit that menu icon, then select your watch live or listen live option. And to join our live chats, just download Telegram, create your profile, and search for Armed American Radio Conversations.
You know what I love about Rob Pincus? Rob Pincus understands camera work. He understands studios. He got up during Greg's introduction, and I'm like, where did he go? But I know he's a professional in front of that camera, and boom, he just pops right back in. Rob, how you doing, man?
With set dressing. I even set dressed a little bit here. So, you know.
It looks good, man. It looks really good. It's good to see you. I tell you what.
Good to be here.
The last couple shows with you have been infuriating, to be honest. They have. I
have that effect on a lot of people.
Well, you can have that effect on a lot of people, but this all for different reasons. I mean, when we talk about, first off, let's talk a little bit about Jersey and what's going on, because there's more Third Circuit news in New Jersey, as you know. The Third Circuit stayed itself. Now, there's theories for that, and I want to get your theories before I tell you what mine is. I talked about it briefly the other day when the announcement came out that they were, in fact, staying it. But are you shocked that they did that, knowing that SCOTUS has taken the case, et cetera?
No, I'm really not. I can't say that I'm not disappointed. I may have been a little bit hopeful, but I'm definitely not surprised. It is, let's just say, common courtesy, common practice inside of the court system that when an appeal is underway for a decision that, especially a decision that's as impactful as this, to be stayed. And I know a lot of people were like, well, wait, you really think this court is going to stay its own decision when it was an en banc decision? And I said, yeah, just because that's kind of how the courts work. And you can imagine they're doing the math, and they're saying, if we let these floodgates open for a year, and then SCOTUS, which I think is unlikely, but if SCOTUS says we were wrong, now look at the chaos we've created for those individuals in New Jersey that we said could have those things that now Supreme Court says they can't. So I understand logistically, if nothing else, as well as sort of like habits and traditions of the court, why they granted the stay. Again, disappointing, but not surprising.
And then New Jersey has yet to respond, to my knowledge. I've not seen a response yet to that stay. You're right on that. We know what's going to happen at SCOTUS. We have a better than 99% option. We know. And the court likely knows that. The Third Circuit likely knows that as well. But SCOTUS has not yet ruled, so they really can't. Let's talk about the theory here. I want to get into, do you think New Jersey, what do you think their response is going to be? They've got limited time to file. If they do file cert, other states, now, because SCOTUS has already taken the two cases that are going to answer New Jersey's problem, similar to what the Third Circuit already did. Ladies and gentlemen, I know this can get a little bit confusing if you're new to the program. The Third Circuit overturned New Jersey's gun bans. Let's just make it very simple for you. Then, about 2 weeks later, they stayed that decision, giving the state the opportunity to either respond in turn by seeking cert at the court, Supreme Court, which the Supreme Court has already agreed to take two similar cases, or not. That's their option to do so. Here's why I think they're going to do that, Rob. I do believe they will do that. Because what that does is that leaves that stay in place no matter what until SCOTUS decides at conference, which is next term. So that guarantees New Jersey's gun ban stays as it is until SCOTUS rules, with absolutely no chance of it being over. And since they've already overturned their own or stayed their own decision, it's not likely. So they have a choice. I think they're going to do it anyway. That's just my thought process, but I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we're on hold until the Supreme Court makes a decision. The interesting lingering question now for people in New Jersey is, and when will New Jersey do anything in regard to the shops and, more importantly, the individuals who took advantage of that freedom window? You know, we've seen this happen several times in California over the years,
Yes.
where the decision is made and some shops in New Jersey decide to move forward and were selling the good freedom stuff to the people of New Jersey that felt like their level of risk aversion would allow them to step into what everyone agrees was a bit of a gray area. Obviously, most lawyers were saying don't do that. Most shops said we're not going to do that, but some of them did, and I applaud them for moving forward. Now, of course, the question hanging over everybody's heads is what's going to happen. I think nothing will happen. I think I have heard some reports, anecdotal reports, that officials from the state of New Jersey have been going into gun shops and asking them if they understand that the stay has been granted. I have not heard any reports of the state police or any other officials from New Jersey going into any shops that were moving forward before the stay was granted. So I'm assuming that nothing is going to happen. We'll see in the long run what happens. I do worry a little bit about the guy who bought the magazines last week,
yes,
who then goes to the gun range with those magazines, gets pulled over for a broken taillight, the proverbial broken taillight traffic stop, has that high capacity, what we would call standard capacity magazine in his car, and what's that local police officer going to do? 99.9% of the police officers I personally know in New Jersey are going to say, yeah, you might want to take that back home and leave it home until after this thing gets worked out. But you could always get that 1 out of 100 guy that wants to push it further. That might be an interesting case anytime in that next year.
Yeah, and with a good lawyer, it just gets put off. It gets put off. It gets put off until SCOTUS rules. It never goes to trial with a good lawyer, because the question becomes, and it's twofold, what does a prosecutor do at this point? Does a prosecutor want to spend resources going after someone to maybe have that individual convicted, which in New Jersey, I would say that wouldn't be a very far cry from that happening, depending on the county, depending on the prosecutor. Is the prosecutor going to want to spend any resources doing that? And then in what might be 2 months later, if it takes that long to go to a trial and they get a conviction, Supreme Court overturns a ban. I don't know. I don't know. So I guess the advice would be, for the closeout of this segment, what's your advice for people now with the stay in place because of the change since you and I talked about this just a week ago and this wasn't an issue?
Yeah, I obviously think that the shops, as far as I know, all the shops that were selling, for example, the standard capacity magazines have stopped doing that. There are some people who ordered magazines for specific firearms. I know at some shops that weren't in stock, those shops are planning on holding those things until this case is resolved. And remember, that's been done. That's why these shops largely had these standard capacity magazines ready to sell, because it is legal for the FFL
right.
to have those magazines on their premises, and I think that's what's going to happen. So if somebody was really worried, if they bought a magazine last week and they're really worried about it, I would advise them to go back to that FFL and say, hey, can you keep these here until this is resolved? And then I think they have nothing to worry about at all, period. I don't think they have much to worry about anyway, but that's the one way to distance yourself from any potential culpability while we wait on the Supreme Court or this appeal process.
If not, you do risk in New Jersey becoming a quote-unquote test case. That can happen if you get that 0.1% or that 1% of the cop on that, as you said, proverbial broken taillight stop. The question becomes, ladies and gentlemen, do you put yourself in that situation? And all of this stems from unconstitutional laws infringing on your rights to begin with. This is not a problem in a free state. This is a problem in a state like New Jersey. But let's talk Rhode Island, New York real quick before we go to the break. California, okay? They're all outside the Third Circuit, so the Third Circuit does not apply to them. SCOTUS is what's going to apply, so those states are in the unique position of not having to worry about it. I should say those residents are in the unique position of, we're just going to have to wait it out. We know that we've waited this long anyway. What's another 11 months at this point, right? 10 and a half months.
Yeah, I think that the people of New York, the people of Massachusetts, more recently the people of Connecticut and Rhode Island, certainly the people of California, and now the people of Colorado know what it's like to wait and have to fight through this stuff. Virginia obviously has this hanging over their heads. Most people, I think, are going to continue to be complacent and wait. We saw last week there were a few people who were really ready to push their limits.
We're getting ready. We're getting ready to take a break. Rob, hold tight with us. We'll be back, ladies and gentlemen. Rob Pincus for 3 more segments. More to go. Pincus, welcome back in, brother. So let's move a little bit. A couple other issues I want to talk with you about are NFA. Tactics. You just mentioned tactics in our text exchange during the break. Ladies and gentlemen, two of the other issues I want to talk with Rob about are the NFA ruling, what that means. We'll explain that in great detail, and media coverage of in and out and tactics. So that's 3 segments left and 3 pretty good topics. Let's start first with tactics, then media coverage. Let's talk a little bit about that. That's in your wheelhouse. We all saw the footage. Most of us have. If you haven't, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the footage of the law-abiding citizen who was armed with an FN-57 suppressed, who laid fire down and stopped the attack, along with, and we want to give a shout out here, even though we haven't seen the video, of the off-duty police officer who also was there that laid fire down, that stopped that attack, ruined the guy's plans, saved countless lives in Idaho, thereby forcing the killer to off himself a lot quicker than he had originally planned. Rob, let's talk tactics. Let's talk tactics, because that's in your wheelhouse. Tell us what you can.
Yeah, for many years, we've talked about psychological stops, and the reality of most defensive gun use is being psychological stops. And what that means is, we describe it at the extreme this way in our classes. If bad guy shows up with a knife, starts running towards you, you pull your gun out, you shoot him dead straight in the chest, he drops the knife, turns around, runs away, runs out of the parking lot, climbs a fence, goes through a few yards, crosses an interstate, jumps over another fence. 2 hours later, the police dogs track him down, or a helicopter with infrared finds him bled out and dead, hiding behind somebody's shed. That was a psychological stop. It wasn't a physical stop, right? Because if he physically used all that energy to run halfway across the county, he could have kept trying to stab you, but you changed the guy's mind. And then you go all the way back to just simply the guy who pulls his jacket back and says, hey, you're picking the wrong victim here. I'm going to resist. I'm going to defend myself. You need to leave. And the guy turns around and runs away. And that's obviously a more obvious psychological stop. Well, you've been through our training classes. Mm-hmm. One of the classes we have is called the Advanced Pistol Handling class, in which we shoot out to 100 yards. If the range has the availability with some steel targets and a safe range for that, we let people shoot their pistols at what we call unreasonable distances, out to 100 yards. We do it a very controlled environment way. We do it a very static way, kind of a target shooting way, just to give them a baseline idea of what they could expect if they tried to shoot at a chest-sized target, a man-sized target at 100 yards with their concealed carry, their EDC, their everyday carry gun. Obviously, that's not what it's meant for. It's not what it's designed for. It's not what most of us carry it for. But because of these talks about spree killings and the situations we find ourselves in, where maybe we're going to be called upon to defend ourselves, our families, or others at extreme and, again, unreasonable distances for a concealed carry handgun, I want these students in the advanced class to have some baseline. And then, of course, we talk about, well, now what would it be like to try to apply those target range shooting skills in an actual dynamic situation? And most people come to the rightful conclusion that they have no business trying to hit a target at 100 yards with their 3 or 4 inch concealed carry gun. But then I also talk to them about this idea of psychological stops, because one of the things that we know happens, and last time I looked at the data, it was over 60% of the spree killings that the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI collect, Department of Justice, they collect the data on, they publish that data, it's very available. Over 60% of them had been stopped by a good guy taking action. That could be a police officer, or it could be somebody tackling a guy, it could be somebody pulling out a gun, it could be a person at the business, it could be a school employee, it could be a principal grabbing a gun from somebody, whatever it is. All kinds of different examples. But the key here is a good guy taking action, good woman, good person taking action to stop the threat. And what happens in a lot of these cases is what we saw in Idaho. Apparently, of course, we're waiting for the final report. It's been less than a week. But what apparently happened is this guy took his own life after being met with resistance. Now, he was met with resistance at least twice. There's another story going around about someone who might have charged at him and got shot in the process of charging at him. I don't know if he would have had his behavior changed by that. This off-duty officer apparently did shoot at him. We don't think he hit him. That officer was injured. That happened inside the restaurant. He then went outside the restaurant, and here's where it gets interesting. The police officers shooting at him off-duty, that what he probably would have perceived as a civilian, shooting at him inside the restaurant, didn't cause him to shoot himself. He apparently went outside and started shooting at those vehicles. I think we've all seen footage of that Prius being shot up. Or the Tesla being shot up while it was charging. Then, at some point, Jordan Salinas, who's been, we're going to talk about the media coverage, who's been very, very, I think, very articulate, very calm, and very poised in his response to this and the attention he's getting, returned fire. And he says he saw a specific change in behavior. And then we do know that the killer eventually takes his own life. We don't know, again, if Jordan Salinas actually hit him or not. And that is completely in line with the advice that I give to students, which is we most often see with these spree killers are out in public, of course, everybody either hits the ground or runs away, which means you shouldn't have to worry too much about bystanders if this situation has been developing for even, a handful of seconds. That gives enough time for people to hit the ground or run away. And if you have a clear backstop, picture, a 3-story brick side of a school that's like the auditorium or the gymnasium, but there's no windows. Picture the side of an anchor store at a mall. Again, 2 or 3 stories tall, just brick, just concrete, no windows, no opens, no bystanders. If you have a clear backstop, you have to start doing the mental math. You may not hit the guy, but if he knows you're shooting at him, 2 things are likely to happen. 1, you're likely to change his behavior. That could make him run away or take his own life. The other thing that could happen is that he could turn his attention to you. So you got to understand you're putting yourself in danger by doing this, potentially more danger than you're in just being in the vicinity, because now you may draw fire. Well, if I went to the mall to pick my daughter up from a movie and she's in a crowd of people coming out of the movie theater, I can't get there because of the bedlam and chaos and traffic, but I can pull out my gun and get that guy to pay attention to me instead of shooting into the crowd that contains my daughter. That's easy math. So there are times, and this is a gross exception to the rule, there are times when I think someone might reasonably and responsibly start shooting without a 100% expectation of actually hitting the target, but also a firm, statistically based, empirically based, data-based expectation that they're going to have a change on the outcome of that situation. And so I have not heard Salinas comment on this. I don't know if he has heard one of those lectures or if he actually expected that he was going to hit the target.
All right. We're going to take a break. There's a lot of ground to cover there. So when we come back from the break, I want to pick that apart just a little bit. More to go with Rob Pincus after this. Don't go away. Back, brother. So a lot to unpack in what you just said. I want to bring up a couple points. I was copiously taking notes, or I was taking copious notes, however you want to phrase that. What you said, that this is 100% in line with what we would see. And let me, listeners, take a listen, because what Rob talked about, this is a cause and effect type of situation. There are certain reactions to what is going to happen. One of those opportunities or one of those actions is going to occur that Rob laid out. There is no in between. Maybe the guy lays down and gives up. That could be one of the other ones, but it's going to be one of those options. He's going to turn his attention to you. He's going to try to run away. He's going to fight back. He's going to continue doing what he's doing and get that. There are a finite number of options here, Rob, so you're spot on with that. The psychological aspect, the only one I would add to that was you talked about somebody pulls a gun, shoots him, the guy drops his knife and runs away. The other one is the threat of a gun being pulled. In my situation, I pulled the gun and didn't shoot, and it stopped the action, which is also a great example of a psychological stop. Those are the only 3 scenarios that can happen, and they're going to get one of those responses. They're either going to continue and you're going to fire, or they're going to do what they did in my situation and leave. So there's finite responses here. So I love the way you broke that down. Now, Jordan found himself in that situation, chose his option, what he chose to do, and I'm paraphrasing him, but he said, I'm in this situation, I have to deal with this, essentially. And he chose to deal with it the way he dealt with it. And then we got one of those responses from the killer. Whichever one it was, we don't, maybe he got more of a response from the off-duty officer shooting. The fact of the matter is he had fire coming at him, and it changed everything. So when you analyze all of that, does that make your job easier when you train, knowing that those outcomes are finite? One of those things is going to happen. So don't you kind of focus your training on the cause and effect type situation there that we're talking about?
Yeah, a lot of people a lot of students will want a one linear path, and it's like, look, that's not reality. What I can do is I can tell you that there are a limited number of variables, and then there's certainly a very limited number of likelihoods. So we can look at empirical evidence, again, what has actually happened in the past. Now, one of the things that changes from this week forward is this example is something that we can talk about now in classes. Right now, again, still waiting for the final reports. What I've said several times now is that we have no evidence that there were any physiologically significant hits scored by either of the good guys with guns. And the reason I think that's really important is that we might find out that one of these suppressed subsonic 5.7 rounds shot out of a suppressed handgun at, I've heard a lot of different numbers thrown around, but I'm not saying this is a fact, but let's just say we find out that at 60 yards, he grazed this guy's shoulder, or he hit him in the leg, and the bullet stopped after 2 or 3 inches of penetration. It hit, it tumbled, it stopped. It didn't do any significant physiological damage, but it psychologically dramatically affected this kid, because then he decided to take his own life. So I think that's the best case scenario from a marksmanship standpoint at this point. Seems like that's what we're going to find out. If we find out that no hits were scored, then again the question becomes, was it a reckless use of a handgun? I can't make that decision on my professional opinion until I know about the backstop, the bystanders, and I'd love to hear more from Salinas himself. What was his expectation? If he, and I get it, he could have read the post I made 3 days ago about psychological stops, and he decided, you know what, I'm gonna steal that line. I doubt that's what's gonna happen. The guy seems sincere. He seems articulate. He seems like a real deal guy. I think that I would trust what he says. If he says, I didn't know if I was going to hit him, but I didn't think anybody else would be endangered by me coming close. And that's completely in line with what we teach. There was an example in a mall in Clackamas, Oregon, 15 years ago, where a good guy with a gun pulled the gun out at a mall shooting. The bad guy was dealing with a malfunction. He pulled the gun out, pointed it at the bad guy, yelled at him to drop the gun, but he said in his statements afterwards that he didn't think he could responsibly shoot because of the backstop and because of bystanders being in the vicinity. But he did have a psychological effect on that bad guy, because he took his malfunctioned gun, ran into one of the back halls of the mall, got the gun fixed, and then took his own life. That was, like I said, 15 years ago. Social media wasn't as big. Armed American Radio wasn't as big. So people didn't really find out about that one. So when I talk about that in classes, that example is a little obscure. Everybody's going to know about this example.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Jordan. Let's get a good segue to media coverage here. I've enjoyed listening to him. He's very articulate about what he did. Now, today we have the benefit of hindsight. He has the benefit of hindsight, okay? I know what happened to me when my tunnel vision hit. I know what happened to me after the incident was over 36 seconds later. I know about the screaming headache. I know about the adrenaline dump. I felt that myself as well. And I felt that in your training classes. When I did one of the drills, moving up 5 yards back, 5 yards back, 5 yards forward, 5 yards back, turn, fire. And I wound up doing that entire drill, dumping 2 magazines, and didn't have any hearing protection on and didn't realize it. I never heard a gunshot until after the gunshots, when I realized I couldn't hear anything. That's when I realized I had left my... So these are all real, true physiological responses that we don't see or feel necessarily at the time until we realize after the fact. So I've enjoyed listening to him talk about it. Media coverage. Are you surprised at the media coverage we're getting? Because ABC News, I got to hand it to him, has done a really, really good job here. I think you commented on ABC as well. But he's gotten media coverage. Again, I got to go back to this. They had no choice to cover it because it was already out there. The video was out there before they could even write the stories. So they had to cover it. But does that matter to you? Because the coverage has been pretty good.
I'm always... I'm a big fan of policing our own house, right? So whenever that trope, the cliche comes out, like, oh, well, watch the mainstream media sweep this under the rug, or mainstream media isn't going to talk about it. I'm hoping that some people learn some lessons, because within 48 hours, this guy was on World News Tonight, and then the next morning he had a feature story on Good Morning America. Within hours of the actual event happening, PBS, the PBS NewsHour was reporting that a good guy with a gun, I forget exactly what word they used. They didn't use the word distract, but got involved and saved lives. So the idea that we never get any coverage, I understand where the sentiment comes from, but never is a big word. And I think historically we get a lot more coverage of the good things that happen and when good guys get involved, whether there's a gun involved or not, than people really want to acknowledge. I also think a lot of people live in echo chambers. So, if you're only in a gun-centric news bubble and you only hear they're not going to cover it, then you just repeat that. I think Good Morning America and World News Tonight, PBS at the very least, deserve acknowledgement, and I think we need to carry that knowledge with us into the next one, expecting better.
We've got you covered. One more segment to go with Rob Pincus. Buckle in, it's going to fly by. Rob, we get up against that hard break and we have to cut you off there. I find that this I wish we had another couple hours because there's so many legs to these stories. I could name you countless stories that should have been covered that weren't. And I can tell you in many cases why some of them weren't. There were racial components to those stories that the media just didn't want to touch. Black guy going after a cop, the CCW holder, I'm talking about a Lee County shooting that should have been lead story on every major alphabet news network that wasn't covered. Eventually, the local press picked it up, but it didn't happen right away when a CCW holder there in traffic walked up and put an end to the guy. We can go to the Greenville Mall shooting, I believe in Indiana, where the kid put him down at like 30 yards away, scored multiple hits, clearly stopping the attack at the time. Then the media does cover that because they're forced to, because it was making national news. I guarantee you, if a guardian at a school shooting were to pull a firearm and put it on the guy or whoever it is, that's going to make national news. And then there's countless other ones that don't. So maybe this is a change. Maybe we're seeing a difference. I'm hopeful that a reporter somewhere out there says, you know what? These stories do happen, and we do need to cover these. Maybe this is a watershed moment, Rob. Maybe it is. I'm the eternal optimist. I know the media too well over all these years, but I'm trying to be the eternal optimist here. And I think you alluded to that maybe this coverage could be a watershed moment. Could it be?
Well, I hope that it's something that sticks in the memory of the gun community and that we use this as a positive example and one to encourage more conversation in our own circles, right? I always think we're going to do more sitting in the stands at our kids' soccer games or whatever, or at the coffee shop talking to somebody next to us than we are sharing a story to our own echo chamber in social media, right? I still think we should share these stories and make sure people are talking about them, but ultimately it's up to us to carry the message. In regard to a change, I guess if you look at the stories that do get talked about with firearms in our country, it's overwhelmingly negative in the mainstream media from our perspective, right? It leans towards gun control. It leans towards talk about the tragedy. But also, if you look at generally, right, if it bleeds, it leads news coverage, we generally see negativity and restrictions and reports about negative outcomes, whether it's natural disasters or war or crime. That's what we generally see out of the media. So I think it is on trend. I don't think we need to get too wrapped around the axle. I think we spend too much time letting it bother us and offend us with the war in Iran and with the issues in the upcoming election. I understand why the national news thinks there are broader issues that affect more people than this hero in Idaho stopping one spree killer. So I kind of get that. I think it's gotten more coverage than I would have expected. I'm glad it did. I just don't think we need to be getting too upset about it. It's a distraction from the real fights like the one we were just talking about in New Jersey.
Yeah, let's talk now about the NFA because we have a Texas court yet again that just ruled the NFA as it applies to suppressors and short-barreled rifles is in fact unconstitutional. Note that they didn't say that about fully automatic weapons. And guys, we've told you for years, that's going to be an uphill climb. That's going to be a battle. That's going to be a separate battle down the road. But as far as suppressors and SBRs, all of them are in common use. And I believe that Texas court is set up perfectly for a future fight that we know is coming because NRA, SAF, GOA, and others are fighting that in court now. And, of course, we had the tax restriction eliminated in the one big, beautiful bill. So we've got, I'm not going to say a long road to hoe anymore. I think the road just got shortened by a number of miles here on this decision. Do you?
Yeah, it's a very exciting decision. It's one, there's some nuance to it. If the injunction against the requirements for the NFA, if those stand under this ruling, right now the injunction, until again we get a Supreme Court ruling on it and it really does go away, one of the fine print pieces here is that it only applies to people involved in the case. Mm-hmm. But by extension, if you're a member of the NRA, if you're a member of SAF, if you're a member of GOA, Firearms Policy Coalition, any of the major organizations, there's a whole list of them out there, then you are covered. Another group that is covered that has standing in this case are customers of certain companies, to include, let's say, Silencer Co. One of the things that's come out before with the brace rules is this idea that if you're protecting the customers of this company, and because you want the company to be able to continue to do business, that's the idea until somebody says, no, you can't under this injunction, that also includes all potential future customers.
Correct.
So by default, this pretty much includes everybody, because anybody who
Can
owns
become a customer.
firearm, who has the plans to own a firearm, that might want to buy a suppressor from Silencer Co., they are covered, as my understanding of the interpretation of the law is, they are covered as customers of Silencer Co. It wouldn't make any sense. The business can't stay in business if it's only about previous customers. It has to be about having future customers as well.
Yeah, and there are some similarities in that ruling along with the post office carry ban as well. That was won by the Second Amendment Foundation and FPC. Same thing holds true. We've got indications. I don't have enough time to talk about it here today, ladies and gentlemen, but we will be talking about it this week coming up. I was speaking with Mr. Gottlieb about this. But the post office is waving the white flag, ladies and gentlemen, and they are absolutely telling their employees what to expect down the road, that people are going to be able to carry in post offices. Go ahead, Rob. I see you waving.
Really quick, I think it's important that, yes, that is the U.S. government, the post office, saying, hey, we get it, the rules have changed. Keep in mind that right now the ball is in the Trump administration's Department of Justice's court. Yep. They can just say, okay, we'll let this stand. They don't have to push against this ruling in Texas. They could let it stand, and that's obviously what we hope that they decide to do.
I'm hopeful that they will do that. Seeing the indications that we've seen from this DOJ, it looks pretty positive there, particularly since the post office appears to be waving a flag to stand down a little bit. I wouldn't be shocked to see an official announcement come from DOJ in the very, very near future. But we've waited for things like this before in the past. It could just be, hey, we're just going to let it go with that ruling. If you're a member of those organizations, you're covered. If you're not, you're not. And, we'll let the ball drop where it falls whenever something happens. My recommendation to all of you is join those organizations, ladies and gentlemen. It's just another reason to join the organizations that are fighting on your behalf. In this case, the SAF. And, of course, the National Rifle Association. Greg and Dallas, how much time do we have?
50.
50 seconds. Rob, I'm at the point now where I can say, where can people find you? You got 20 seconds. Go for it, brother.
Personal Events Network. On all the social media, Instagram and Facebook, both my pro page and personal page, about 3 days ago, I posted an AI summary. I used AI professionally for the first time.
30.
I posted an AI summary of everything I've said about psychological stops over the years and this incident that we saw in Idaho. So that's worth reviewing, but you can always go to Personal Events Network and check
20.
the training schedule for the Personal Events Network training tour and all the old information from the training videos.
That's Rob Pincus, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get up and do it again tomorrow because they don't want us to. Enjoy your day. Stay safe. I love each and every one of you, and I'll see you on the radio tomorrow. Greg's favorite day of the week. It's a Friday. Thanks for being here, Rob. See you on the radio, guys.